December 3, 1929, 11:42 p.m. Tommy the Snake. Marconi was counting his blood money when Al Capone walked through his front door. $1 million in cash sat spread across Tommy's kitchen table, payment for betraying the man who had treated him like a brother for 8 years. Tommy's hand froze halfway to his gun as he looked into Al Capone's eyes and saw something that made his blood turn to ice. There was no anger, no rage, no explosive violence. There was only the calm, patient smile of a man who had spent 3 weeks planning the perfect revenge. "Hello, Tommy," Al said, pulling up a chair across from his former best friend. "I see you got your 30 pieces of silver, but here's what the FBI didn't tell you when they made their deal. The money comes with a price that you're going to spend the rest of your very short life paying." Over the next 72 hours, Al Capone would demonstrate to Tommy Marconi and everyone connected to his betrayal that there were fates worse than death, types of punishment that would make grown men beg for the mercy of a bullet rather than endure one more hour of Al Capone's creativity. What Tommy didn't know as he sat in his kitchen surrounded by his betrayal money was that Al Capone had discovered the FBI's plan 6 hours after Tommy had agreed to cooperate. Every meeting, every piece of information Tommy had provided, every detail of his treachery had been carefully monitored and documented by Al's intelligence network. The FBI thought they were running Tommy as an informant against Al Capone. In reality, Al Capone had been using Tommy to feed false information to the federal government while preparing the most psychologically devastating revenge in criminal history. To understand what happened to Tommy Marconi in December 1929, you need to understand what his betrayal meant to Al Capone. Tommy wasn't just another soldier in the Chicago outfit. He was Al's closest friend, the man he had saved from poverty and recruited into his organization when Tommy was 18 years old. For 8 years, Tommy had been Al's confidant, his advisor, the person he trusted with his deepest secrets and his most dangerous plans. When Al discovered that Tommy had been secretly meeting with FBI agents, providing them with detailed information about outfit operations, it wasn't just a business betrayal, it was the destruction of a friendship that Al had considered sacred, the violation of a trust that had taken years to build and seconds to shatter. But Al Capone didn't react to Tommy's betrayal with the explosive violence that his enemies expected. Instead, he did something far more terrifying. He became patient. He studied Tommy's psychology, analyzed his fears, identified his weaknesses, and designed a punishment so perfectly tailored to his former friend's personality that it would break his mind before it broke his body. November 15, 1929, 18 days before the confrontation. FBI agent William Morrison sat across from Tommy Marconi in a downtown Chicago diner, finalizing the deal that both men believed would end Al Capone's criminal empire. Morrison had been working on Tommy for 6 months, gradually convincing him that cooperating with the federal government was the only way to save his own life. "The information you've provided about Capone's operations has been invaluable," Morrison told Tommy as he slid a briefcase across the table. $1 million as promised. Half now, half when Capone is convicted. Tommy opened the briefcase and stared at more money than he had ever seen in his life. $500,000 in crisp bills, enough to disappear from Chicago and live comfortably anywhere in the world. "What guarantees do I have that Capone won't find out?" Tommy asked, his voice betraying the fear that had been growing in his mind for weeks. "We've been extremely careful," Morrison assured him. "Our meetings have been completely secret. Capone has no idea that you're cooperating. By the time he figures out what's happening, he'll be in federal prison and you'll be long gone." But Morrison was wrong about the secrecy of their meetings. Al Capone had known about Tommy's betrayal since their second encounter, and he had been using that knowledge to orchestrate one of the most sophisticated counterintelligence operations in criminal history. November 20th, 1929, 13 days before the confrontation. Al Capone sat in his office at the Lexington Hotel, reviewing the intelligence reports that his network had compiled on Tommy's FBI cooperation. Frank Nitti, his chief enforcer, stood beside his desk holding a folder containing photographs of Tommy's meetings with federal agents. "Boss," Nitti said, "we've got everything we need to prove Tommy's a rat. Just give me the word and I'll take care of him." Al looked up from the reports and smiled with an expression that made even Nessie uncomfortable. "No, Frank. Killing Tommy would be too simple, too quick. He betrayed 8 years of friendship for money. I'm going to make him understand exactly what that betrayal cost him." "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to let Tommy continue meeting with the FBI. Let him think he's safe. Let him think he's outsmarted us. Meanwhile, we're going to feed him information that will make the federal government think they're getting closer to bringing down our organization." Nissi looked confused. "You want us to help Tommy betray us?" "I want us to control Tommy's betrayal," Al corrected. "Every piece of information he gives the FBI will be carefully selected by us. We're going to use Tommy's greed to manipulate the federal government while we prepare a lesson that will ensure no one ever betrays Al Capone again." What Al was planning wasn't just revenge against Tommy. It was a demonstration to every person in his organization that betrayal didn't just result in death, but in something far worse, complete psychological destruction. November 25, 1929, 8 days before the confrontation. Tommy Marconi met with FBI agent Morrison for what he believed would be their final meeting before Al Capone's arrest. Tommy had provided the federal government with what he thought was detailed information about outfit operations, including the locations of illegal gambling houses, the names of corrupt police officials, and the details of Capone's money laundering operations. "This is excellent work, Tommy," Morrison said, reviewing the intelligence reports. "With this information, we'll be able to arrest Capone and most of his organization within the week." Tommy felt a mixture of relief and guilt as he accepted the second half of his payment, $1 million total. Enough money to disappear forever and start a new life somewhere far from Chicago. But as he walked out of the diner that night, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The information he had provided to the FBI was accurate, but it seemed too easy, too convenient. Al Capone was one of the most paranoid and security-conscious criminals in America. How had Tommy been able to access so much sensitive information without arousing suspicion? What Tommy didn't know was that every piece of intelligence he had provided to the FBI had been carefully crafted by Al Capone himself. The gambling houses were already closed. The corrupt police officials had already been transferred to different departments. The money laundering operations had been moved to new locations. Tommy hadn't betrayed Al Capone's real secrets. He had betrayed carefully constructed lies designed to make the federal government waste their resources while Al prepared his revenge. December 1, 1929, 2 days before the confrontation, the FBI's raid on Al Capone's organization was a complete failure. Every location Tommy had identified was empty. Every official he had named had clean records. Every operation he had described had vanished without a trace. Agent Morrison realized immediately that they had been played. Tommy Marconi's betrayal had been discovered and manipulated, turning their most valuable informant into a weapon against the federal government. "We need to get Tommy into protective custody," Morrison told his supervisor. "If Capone knows he's been cooperating, Tommy's life isn't worth 5 minutes." But when FBI agents went to Tommy's apartment, they found it empty. Tommy had disappeared, along with the $1 million he had received for his betrayal. What the FBI didn't know was that Tommy hadn't fled Chicago. He was exactly where Al Capone wanted him to be, alone, scared, and completely vulnerable to the revenge that was coming. December 3, 1929, 11:42 p.m. Tommy Marconi was in his kitchen counting his blood money when he heard footsteps on his front porch. He had been hiding in a safe house on Chicago's South Side for 2 days, trying to decide whether to flee the city or attempt to negotiate with Al Capone. When Al walked through the front door, Tommy understood immediately that negotiation was no longer possible. Al's calm demeanor was more terrifying than any expression of anger could have been. "Tommy," Al said, sitting down across from his former friend, "we need to talk." "Al, listen," Tommy began, his voice shaking. "I can explain everything. The FBI, they pressured me. They threatened me. I never wanted to betray you. I know exactly what happened," Al replied calmly. "You took their money because you thought betraying me was the safest way to secure your future. You calculated that the FBI's protection was worth more than my friendship." Tommy reached for his gun, but Al's voice stopped him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Tommy. You see, killing you would be too easy. After 8 years of friendship, after everything I've done for you, after all the trust I placed in you, death would be a mercy you don't deserve." Al reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph, which he placed on the table next to Tommy's money. It was a picture of Tommy meeting with FBI agent Morrison. "I've known about your betrayal for weeks," Al continued. "Every meeting, every piece of information you provided, every lie you told them about my operations. I let you continue because I wanted you to feel safe, wanted you to think you had outsmarted me." Tommy stared at the photograph, his face turning pale as he realized the full scope of his situation. "The $1 million you're counting," Al said, "is the last money you'll ever touch. The information you provided to the FBI was worthless, carefully crafted lies that I fed to you so you could feed to them. You didn't betray my secrets, Tommy. You betrayed fake secrets while I prepared your punishment." "What do you want?" Tommy whispered. "I want you to understand what betrayal actually costs," Al replied. "Death is quick, Tommy. What I have planned for you is permanent." What happened next would become legend in Chicago's criminal underworld. Al Capone didn't kill Tommy Marconi. Instead, he implemented a punishment so psychologically devastating that Tommy would spend the rest of his life begging for the mercy of death. December 4th, 1929. First day of Tommy's punishment. Al Capone's revenge began with the systematic destruction of everything Tommy cared about. His girlfriend Maria disappeared from her apartment, leaving behind only a note that read, "Tommy's betrayal has consequences." His younger brother Vincent, who worked as a mechanic and had no connection to criminal activities, was fired from his job when his employer received an anonymous tip that Vincent was connected to federal informants. Tommy's elderly mother received an eviction notice from her landlord, who had been convinced that renting to the family of an FBI informant was too dangerous for his other tenants. Within 24 hours, everyone in Tommy's life was suffering consequences for his betrayal, and each person who suffered received a message explaining that their pain was Tommy's fault. December 5th, 1929, second day of Tommy's punishment. Tommy tried to use his FBI contacts to get protection, but Agent Morrison's phone calls went unanswered. The federal government had no use for an informant whose information had proven worthless, and they certainly weren't going to risk resources protecting a man who had been compromised. Tommy tried to leave Chicago but discovered that every train station, bus depot, and airport in the city was being watched by Al Capone's people. He was trapped in a city where his former boss controlled every escape route. Most terrifyingly, Tommy began receiving phone calls every hour, each one describing in detail how another person in his life was suffering because of his betrayal. His cousin lost his job. His childhood friend was evicted from his apartment. His barber refused to serve him after receiving threats. Al Capone was systematically isolating Tommy from every human connection he had ever made, ensuring that he understood the full social cost of his betrayal. December 6th, 1929, third day of Tommy's punishment. The psychological pressure of watching everyone he cared about suffer began to break Tommy's mind. He hadn't slept in 3 days, hadn't eaten in 2 days, and had spent every waking moment trying to figure out how to stop Al Capone's revenge. That's when Tommy made the decision that Al had been waiting for. He called Al Capone and begged for a meeting. "Please," Tommy sobbed into the phone. "I'll give back the money. I'll do anything. Just stop hurting innocent people. They don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes." "You're right, Tommy," Al replied calmly. "They don't deserve to suffer, but they are suffering, and it's entirely your fault. Every person whose life I'm destroying is paying the price for your betrayal. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to beg, Tommy. I want you to get on your knees and beg for the mercy you didn't show me when you took the FBI's money." December 6th, 1929, 8 p.m. Tommy Marconi knelt on the floor of the Four Deuces Club, surrounded by 40 members of Al Capone's organization, begging for mercy while tears streamed down his face. "Please, Al," Tommy sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. Just please stop hurting innocent people." Al Capone stood over his former friend, looking down at the man who had been broken by 3 days of psychological warfare. "Tommy," Al said, "this is what betrayal looks like. This is what happens when someone destroys 8 years of friendship for money. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everyone who ever trusted you, everyone who ever cared about you." Tommy collapsed completely, his body shaking with sobs as he realized that his betrayal had destroyed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone he loved. "I want everyone in Chicago to see this," Al announced to his assembled men. "I want them to see what happens to people who betray Al Capone. Death would have been too quick for Tommy. Instead, he's going to live with the knowledge that his greed destroyed everything he ever cared about." December 7th, 1929, the morning after, Tommy Marconi was found by Chicago police, sitting in Grant Park, staring at nothing, his mind completely broken by the psychological trauma of Al Capone's revenge. He was holding the $1 million he had received for his betrayal, but he no longer seemed to understand what money was or why it mattered. Al Capone's punishment had been so complete, so psychologically devastating, that Tommy's mind had simply shut down rather than continue processing the guilt and horror of what his betrayal had cost. Tommy was committed to a psychiatric hospital, where he would spend the rest of his life in a catatonic state, unable to speak, unable to function, unable to escape the knowledge that his greed had destroyed everyone he had ever loved. Al Capone's message to the criminal underworld was clear. Betraying him didn't result in death. It resulted in something far worse: complete psychological destruction that would make death seem like mercy. The Tommy Marconi incident became legend in Chicago's criminal community. For decades afterward, criminals would use the phrase "pulling a Tommy" to describe the kind of betrayal that resulted in total psychological breakdown rather than simple execution. Al Capone had proven once again that his greatest weapon wasn't violence, but his understanding of human psychology and his ability to craft punishments so perfectly tailored to his enemies' fears that death would be a welcome relief. If this story of ultimate betrayal and psychological revenge shocked you, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who understands that in the criminal underworld, some betrayals create consequences worse than death. Drop a comment below. Do you think Tommy deserved what happened to him, or did Al Capone go too far? Turn those notifications on, because next week we're telling the story of how Al Capone's final confrontation with the federal government established his legend and changed organized crime forever. Remember, in the world of organized crime, loyalty is everything, and Al Capone proved that betraying that loyalty doesn't just cost you your life, it costs you your sanity, your family, and everything you ever cared about.